Okay, so we are going to start in 5 minutes. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar hosted by DevOps University on the topic Did Kubernetes remove Docker? So my name is Pratyush Tiwari and I'm a DevOps consultant at DevOps University, and I'll be the speaker for today. So first of all, those who are not familiar with what Kubernetes is, there is a brief introduction of Kubernetes. So what Kubernetes is, it is a DevOps tool that keeps track of your container application that are deployed into the cloud. What does it mean? Basically, it shut down the containers which are not in use currently. Okay, so what does it do? It save resources. Okay, and it starts containers which are often, and also it keeps a track of memory, storage, and CPU. Okay, so all these things are done and performed by the Kubernetes in a cloud. So what are we going to discuss today? So our today's agenda would be what is the buzz around Docker and Kubernetes? As you can see from December, since December, people were talking about Kubernetes removing Docker, Kubernetes depreciating Docker. What is it exactly, and what does it mean? What do we understand, and what do we get in the end? And how does it impact us? All these things we are going to cover, and we would also take a look over the Kubernetes version 1.20 release notes. So what exact release note is, and what does it tell us about the Kubernetes version 1.20, we are going to discuss about that. And moving on, our primary focus would be Kubernetes depreciating Docker. So what does it mean exactly when we are saying Kubernetes has depreciated Docker or Docker support or Docker shim? What does it mean? And how is it going to impact developers? And how is it going to impact administrators? Because these are two roles which are going to impacted by this particular Kubernetes removing Docker support. And at last, we would conclude, what do we get in the end? What do we have in hand? Okay. So I think today's agenda is very clear. So I can start it, right? Or you all are getting my voice? Is my voice clear?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So we are going to discuss what is buzz around Docker and Kubernetes. Okay. So communities have been talking about since December. So what happened exactly? What we are looking at? Kubernetes version 1.20 was released at December 2, 2020. And the buzz was created around December 4, 2020, 2 days after the release. Internet was really flooded with the content like Kubernetes has removed Docker and as a container runtime environment. So what would be the next? What would be the alternative? And there were a lot of confusions and perceptions. There were a lot of misconceptions which were among the communities of developers and administrators who were impacted by this. Okay, so nobody was really certain what happened. Okay, so actually there is a thing. People don't really get into the depth of a topic. Basically, read the heading or read the subheading and try to determine or try to percept what the thing exactly is. Okay, so this was the real cause of the buzz. This was the real stuff which was going on. So people and teams who are using Kubernetes and Docker as a container runtime interface of Kubernetes, impacted by the news. Okay, that's a really good thing that they were impacted by the news, because if we are going to use Docker as a container runtime environment for Kubernetes, and suddenly a news came out that Docker has been removed from Kubernetes, obviously we will get impacted. But there was a lot of misinformation all over the internet. Nobody was really certain what happened. So we are going to discuss about this. What is the buzz? What is the proper solution? What is the proper alternative? What exactly Kubernetes version 1.20 states, and what does it mean? Okay, so all these things we are going to discuss. Even DevOps engineers were confused about this news, that what is going to happen next. So let us take a look at the release note of version 1.20. So we'll get a better understanding that what exactly happened, what Kubernetes version 1.20 release note states, and what exactly came out. Okay. So here is a brief of release note of Kubernetes version 1.20. Kubernetes is deprecating Docker as container runtime environment after version 1.20. So this was the first heading. All right, this was the heading. Kubernetes is depreciating Docker. People had made a perception around this only, that Kubernetes is depreciating Docker as container runtime environment. But they didn't read out the second line, and just the second line was, you need not to panic. It is not as dramatic as it sounds. Okay, so it was clearly stated in the release notes that there is no need to panic. It is not as dramatic as it sounds. No need to worry about, oh, now Kubernetes has removed Docker. What do we do next? We need not to worry about this. So what exactly it wanted to say? So Docker as an underlying runtime environment is being depreciated in favor of runtime that are used as container runtime interface, CRI. So that's the full form of CRI, container runtime interface created for Kubernetes. So it clearly stated that Docker is only underlying the runtime is being depreciated, and the previous runtime was Docker shim, right? So Docker shim was being depreciated. Docker shim being depreciated means Docker shim is no longer be supported by the Kubernetes. no longer be maintained by the Kubernetes. Okay, so whatever next patches or release notes would be there, so there won't be a discussion about Docker shim. So there will be a alternate container runtime interface would be introduced in Kubernetes. So what does it mean? Does it mean we are not going to use Docker images into the cluster of Kubernetes? No, obviously not. We are going to use Docker images. It will not affect our Docker images that we are using in our cluster as runtime. Okay, so everything would be on the same pace as it was before. Only the thing is, runtime environment, runtime interface has been changed. Okay, so earlier it was Docker shim. Now it is container or cryo. So Docker is a popular choice of the runtime among various administrators and developers. It is very popular, but now we have options of container and cryo. Okay, so Docker was not exactly designed for Kubernetes, right? But Kubernetes community has developed Docker shim as a container runtime interface support as a temporary solution for the CRI. But now Kubernetes community has taken a step further and developed the support with containerd and cryo. So now cryo and container would be act as the next container runtime interface. All right. So what does it mean now? Kubernetes deprecating Docker. So what does it mean? Use of Docker shim as a tool in Kubernetes cluster has been deprecated. Earlier, Kubernetes was maintaining the Docker shim. Okay, so Kubernetes was updating the code. Kubernetes was handling the code. But now Kubernetes has said that Docker shim would no longer be supported by Kubernetes. And what is going to happen next is as um, 1.23 would release, it would remove the Docker as a container runtime. Okay, so right now, not right now, but in early, maybe later in 2021, Kubernetes version 1.23 would be released, and that would completely remove the Docker as a container runtime environment. So basically, what they have done, they have given us a path which we have to choose in future. Okay, so what they have done, they have set us a goal that now we are depreciating Docker for a while, but soon in future, when we would release another update, so full Docker would be depreciated as a container runtime. So Docker would no longer be supported after version 1.23, which is yet to be released. Okay. So Docker isn't compliant with CRI. Docker is not designed for container runtime interface. Okay. So that's why we needed Docker shim. That's why we needed a tool to act as a bridge between these two tools, Kubernetes and Docker. Okay. So now Kubernetes has removed the Docker shim support. So soon they would be also removing the Docker as a container runtime environment. You just need to change your container runtime from Docker to another supported container runtime. What we need to do now, because they have removed it, so they have suggested just we need to change the container runtime from Docker. Earlier we were using Docker as a container runtime, but there are various dedicated container runtimes, so like containerd. So we are going to use in upcoming future. Docker was not designed to be embedded inside Kubernetes. Kubernetes and Docker are two separate tools, and these two works in a correlation in such a way that we are able to produce images and deploy them on our Kubernetes cluster. But it is not designed to be embedded inside Kubernetes. They work parallelly, but it's quite hard. It's quite what do we mean by hard here is it's quite using a lot of resources, more resources inside Kubernetes if we are using Docker as a container runtime, which was the case earlier. So, okay, so a lot of resources were being used, okay, inside Kubernetes due to the Docker as container runtime. So Docker runtime support would be removed in future releases, currently planned for 1.22 release, in late 2021. So in late 2021, we can expect that Docker would be removed as container runtime. So now it is an option, okay? Because Kubernetes has removed the Docker shim support. It won't be uh, updating or amending the Docker shim anymore, but it hasn't removed it completely. The buzz around here is Docker shim supports has been taken off by Kubernetes, but we still can use Docker as a container runtime environment, which soon we won't be able to use after the release of version 1.22. Okay, so I hope the picture is very clear. So moving on to the next slide, what do we have? How does it impact developers? Because as an end user, what do we care about? What are our concerns? How does it impact us, right? So either we are uh, as a DevOps engineer, we are developer or we are system administrators. So if we are a developer, how does it going to impact us? If you're an end user of the Kubernetes, not a whole lot will be changing for you. Okay. So if you're a developer, you're an end user, there's not a lot of things which are going to change, because earlier the development process was uh, very easy and same. It won't be changed in the pattern. It doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't use Docker as development tool anymore. Okay. So here it is clearly stated that Docker uh, would be your development tool if you choose it to be. Okay, it's solely your choice. If you're choosing to work on Docker, you can still work on Docker, right? The Docker installation you're using in development is unrelated to Docker runtime inside your Kubernetes cluster, right? So here, this is the point which we need to focus as developers. So this is saying that inside Kubernetes cluster, Docker runtime environment is something which is not related to your Docker installation, right? Your Docker installation tool in which you're developing something is completely independent of the Docker runtime inside the Kubernetes cluster. It is not going to impact each other. No direct impact on developers, as we are the end users. So what do we have to do? We have to deploy the code. So it is not going to impact a lot of problem, or it won't be causing any issue for developers. It can be a bit confusing at the start, but nothing major has changed, and which would impact the work of the developers. So nothing would be changed in the workflow. Everything would be same as earlier. Everything would be a very smooth process. The Docker has clearly been a great tool for developers, and developers has been using it. It's quite popular one. So if a developer want to use the Docker, they can, and they would be definitely. And this Docker runtime would be depreciated, would be removed soon by the Kubernetes. And these two tools are completely independent of each other. Although the Docker runtime was created just to make the process easy, but because it was using a lot of resources, now it has been depreciated. Now let's talk about what if we are administrators. How does it going to impact us? How does it going to impact the administrators? So here are the things which are which need a undivided attention of administrators. Why? Because developers were not so much impacted by this change, but now administrators should pay attention to it, because installation of Docker would be an optional for an administrator. If you want to use Docker, you can install it. Otherwise, it is not necessary. Why it is not necessary? Because there would be a default container runtime environment would be introduced by Kubernetes. So you need not to install any additional runtime environment. Although if you want, you can install Docker. Installation process will be automated with container runtime. Okay, as I told, the default container runtime would be installed with Kubernetes only. But if admin wants, they can use the complete Docker, right? Installation process will be fast and size of installation would be reduced. Why? The reason is very simple. Earlier, what we are doing, we are installing Kubernetes and we are installing Docker as a container runtime. But now, what we can do, we only have to install the Kubernetes only, right? Which is coming with a default container runtime, which is inbuilt into it. So now, what would it do? It would reduce the size of the installation, and it would reduce the uses of the resources, because suppose we have limited resources over cloud. We have bought some resources, some gigabytes of storage and some processing unit and some memory. So now what we are going to do, we are going to divide those resources among various process, various containers. It would uh, minimize the resources uses for each container. Why? Because the size of installation is very light, so it would be easy to run, right? No additional software is being installed upon that. So it would be optimize the resources for better performance, because if you're saving resources, you can use those resources in doing other processes, other things, right? Installation on any platform can be done with or without Docker. So Kubernetes can be installed on any cloud platform with or without Docker, without any restriction. Docker can still be run as it is available for admin as an option to use. So as we have discussed, if admin wants, they can install the complete Docker. They need not to worry that they can't install Docker, but it is highly recommended that to save the system resources, one must use the default container runtime. Dockershim would now be maintained by the Mirantis and can be used as a third-party runtime tool. So here's the good news for the administrator who are quite familiar with Dockershim, and we want to go with Dockershim only as a container runtime environment. What is here now? Dockershim would now be maintained by Mirantis. Mirantis is a company which is now taking over the control of Dockershim, and now they will maintain the code of the Dockershim, and it can be used as a third-party tool now. Earlier, it was into the Kubernetes, but now Kubernetes has taken off the hands from Dockershim. Dockershim is now shifted to Mirantis, and it's a property of Mirantis now. So let us visualize what has been changed. So let's take a look of Kubernetes before version 1.2. What was it? So was an end user and internal API, CRI. So Dockershim and Docker, as you can see in the REST API, Dockershim and Docker were a part of the Kubernetes cluster, right? But now what has been changed? So Kubernetes after version 1.20, this Dockershim and Docker has been replaced by CRI-O, that is Containerd. Okay, so Containerd is a container runtime interface, okay, which is replacing Docker and Dockershim, right? So only this has been changed. Dockershim and Docker has been replaced by CRI-O. So we need not to worry a lot about it, because that's a really simple thing. Piece of software has been replaced by another piece of software. That's it. Okay. So Dockershim and Docker has been removed and from the Kubernetes by default, and CRI-O has been implemented by default. So what do we get in the end? So what do we conclude after taking the session? What do we understand after being all through the stuff? Docker support would completely be taken off from Kubernetes, and people would need to use another container runtime for Kubernetes very soon in 2021 only, because Kubernetes has already stated that they are going to do it in future as version 1.22 or might be version 1.23. So they might be removing this completely. Depreciating Dockershim support is the first step towards getting people comfortable with another runtime to use. Okay, as I already told, they have taken the first step. Now, what we have to do, we have to be get comfortable using the another runtime as in Kubernetes, because people were really comfortable with Dockershim and Docker. Now they this might be a bit challenging for people who are quite new to CRI-O, but Cryo is a great piece of work. It might not be affecting developers in this stage, but would be a big change in upcoming Kubernetes update, because as soon as Docker support would be removed, so it might not be affecting right now because Docker shim has been removed only, but Docker support would be taken off in future, and then it might impact the developers, because developers who were using Docker images into the Kubernetes cluster might be affected by the upcoming update. It solely depends upon what update is going to come after. All right. It would require admin to choose another container runtime to support Kubernetes in future updates, as Docker would be completely removed. If we don't want to use the default container runtime interface, the admins would have choice or would have a option to use another container runtime. Okay, whether they can use containerd and maybe Docker gem if it is going to maintain by Mirantis. And in 2021, there is chances that Kubernetes would completely remove Docker support. So we must be ready for that. Okay, so it shouldn't be a very shocking news that Kubernetes has removed Docker support completely, because they have already stated it. So soon in 2021 later, we can expect that. Kubernetes is suggesting switching to another compliant container runtime like containerd or Cryo, and if any else, then make sure it supports Docker daemon configuration. If we still want to run the Docker images, what we need to do, all we need to care about is we need to switch to another container runtime which supports Docker daemon configurations. Okay, so if they support the configurations, we would be easily able to run the Docker images onto the Kubernetes cluster. So it's not a big deal. They're going to remove it off completely. That's a fact, because they have already stated it, and maybe soon in upcoming updates, upcoming patches, they would be removing it. So this is what we get. So before starting the session, there was an idea that Kubernetes remove Docker. So the answer is no, not till now. But yes, they have taken the first step towards it, and they have depreciated the Docker shim for now. But soon in upcoming updates, in version 1.22 or maybe version 1.23, they would be removing it. So we must be ready for that. So thank you for all. And this was all from my end. This is all from DevOps University. So it was a wonderful webinar. We learned about what Kubernetes is and what is the buzz going on about Kubernetes deprecating Docker. Thank you, everyone. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. Okay, so I think there are no questions. If you guys have any questions, you can ask.
Thank you for this webinar. I think we don't have any questions.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Good night.